Welcome back. So we're continuing working on our mud shader. In the last video we finished off a few adjustments to our diffuse texture there just to get a little bit more visual interest into our material. Now one thing that's kind of missing is our puddles don't really have much detail. At the moment they're just these flat planes, we have no variation in colour at all, and they do look okay, especially when there's really nice reflections on them, but I'd like to give that a little bit more detail. So the first thing that we're going to do to give these more detail is we're going to create a new bump map just for the puddles themselves. So I'm going to move this displacement map down a little bit. Previously we used this less than to mask off our puddles, so we can use that to add a mask to our bump. So at the moment we have these bump maps, and you can see in this mix node we are mixing our noise texture for our overall mud bump. And you can see we're just adding in this grey colour to our puddles. So what we want to do is we want to add something in to slot B here, which is this grey. And that's going to be a wave texture. So I'm going to grab a texture, wave texture. Now I can just grab this redirect and plug in a vector. I'll move this up and plug this in here. Now let's just plug this straight in. I think we want to plug it straight into slot B. And let's look at our result. So you can see we have our waves, and at the moment they don't look very good. And that's not very surprising. Let's go into our wave texture. And first of all, let's make a little bit more space. Let's increase the distortion a little bit. Let's increase the scale quite a bit as well. So I'm not entirely sure what scale we should use for this. I think we'll stick with around about 50 for the moment. Maybe a little bit more distortion. Okay, I think that should be okay. We don't really want much detail or scale or roughness, so we'll leave those alone for the moment. And now we've got some nice ripples. However, I would say these ripples are a little bit too strong. So what we want to do is we want to adjust that. Now at the moment we have no real control over how we can adjust that. We're going to do that with a map range node. So the reason I'm going to use a map range node is because we can adjust these values later on using these inputs directly in our node group. If we had used something like a color ramp, we would have to do a few extra steps in order to bring that into our node group. So it's easier just jumping straight to a map range node. So if you look at our wave texture at the moment, we have values going from 0 right in the middle of this dark line to 1 right at the top of this white line. And we want to reduce those values down. So our from min and from max are at 0 and 1, which is correct. We want to change our to min to probably around about 0.45 and our to max to something like 0.5. And that just greatly decreases the range of values. So if you look at that result, you can see it's really not much contrast there. It's a very subtle effect. Now if you look at our result, it should look slightly different, but not too much different. You can see it's not really made much of an adjustment. So what we really want to do is, before we plug this into this mix node, let's just mix it with this value that was originally coming in. So let's duplicate this node. Let's pop this here. We'll put this in slot B, I think. And let's grab this original value that was going into slot B. Let's put it in slot A. And let's stick with mix, I think. And let's just put this factor way down. So I think it's still a little bit strong. Let's try 0.001. Okay, and that's a much better effect. So you can see that we have our ripples on our water, but it is really, really subtle. And I think that fixes the bump map on our water. Now the next thing I want to do on the water is let's find an edge for our water. So you can see just in this area, we go from mud straight to water. We don't have any transparency or any dispersion in our water whatsoever. So let's fake that. Let's fake that using a similar system that we used to essentially change the roughness or the color of our mud. We're going to use this map here. we've already used this at less than to get a really strong mask. We're going to use a very similar mask, but it's going to have a little bit of grey into this white. So let's grab color ramp node. I'm going to put it up here for the moment, but we'll move that in just a second. Let's grab this color ramp and we'll put it in our diffuse color. So this is where we add in our mud, and at the moment the mask that we have is coming straight from this less than node. What we want to do is we want to get a mask very similar to this less than node, but with a little bit of blur on it. So at the moment we're using a value of 0.2 going into our less than node. So one thing that we know is we're going to need a flag at 0.2. And if this was set to constant right now, and we take this white down to 0.2, this is the mask that we've got flipped over. So if we actually flip that color ramp and take this down to 0.2, that's more or less the mask that we have just now. Let's go back to ease and let's just adjust this a little bit. So we're going to take this value to 0.2. We're going to take this white value to really anything we want. It doesn't really matter too much because the only part of the mask that's going to matter is values less than 0.2. So let's duplicate this puddle mask node. We are going to add in a darker value here. This is going to be our factor, and we're going to grab our original color. So you can see now, instead of using this mask, we're going to use this mask. So we'll plug this in here. And if we look at this as its original mask, you can see that we've not adjusted any color on our puddle mask. But if we start adjusting these flags, we should be able to just start bringing in a little bit of darkness around the edges here. We can make that a little bit more contrasting. And the idea is here, we just want to darken just around the edges of our puddles. And also sometimes in the middle of our puddles. If we zoom out a little bit, you can probably see we have some areas where we can see in the middle of our puddles. And this is going to give the indication that we have something just below the surface. So let's look at the result here. Okay, and that actually starts to look really nice. So because we're using this color ramp on the height, we have a nice blur. So it does look as if that you're seeing just below the surface or just a little bit into the water, and it just gives it a little bit more realism. Now we can adjust this mask even more. We can make it stronger. We can make it lighter. I think I quite like a little bit of a wider dispersion here. I think something like that looks quite interesting. I think that adds a fair bit more realism to our material. I think it definitely looks a little bit better. Gives our puddles a little bit more detail. You can see they're still shiny. Okay, and that pretty much takes us to the end of our mud shader. Okay, so it's challenge time. So just another quick challenge in this video. Just finished tidying up the node tree using colours, frames and labels. And also mark this mud material as an asset so that you'll always have access to it. Now in the next video, we're going to turn this mud material into a single custom node group with a decent amount of customization to create many different varieties of this mud texture. So I'll see you then.